My last video was about how the staff is a failure of a visual tool for understanding music. This video, however, is about the few ways in which the staff is amazing as a visual tool for understanding music. I'm going to jump right into it. The staff is often used as part of sheet music, and sheet music is a written language that many musicians use to communicate how a song should be played. Now, sheet music is filled with different footnotes that sort of explain what a musician should be doing. So, for example, dynamic markers indicate to a musician how loud or how soft a certain passage should be played. And there's various Italian words that are used that indicate to a musician with what sort of emotion they should approach a passage, or what the tempo of the passage would be. Now, the staff itself operates in a way where it's a bit like a graph, where along the x-axis, meter is expressed, and along the y-axis, pitch is expressed. So when it comes to individual notes, the actual shape of the note and where it's positioned along the x-axis gives us an idea of how to approach those notes and how they fit into the general meter of the music. And the actual position of those notes along lines or spaces on the y-axis gives us an idea of where they fit into the tonality of the music, or what exact pitches they should play. We also have these two sort of markers, the key signature and the time signature. And the idea behind the key signature and the time signature is that the key signature is supposed to give musicians a context to understand how the notes relate to the tonality of the music. And the time signature is supposed to give musicians a context for understanding how the notes relate to the meter of the piece. Just like my last video, this video is going to focus on pitch and tone instead of meter and rhythm. I'm a lot more interested in pitch and tone, so right now I'm making videos that are about the staff and how the staff works with pitch and tone. If things in this video don't make sense, it also might be helpful to click the link in my description and watch my previous video if you didn't, because a lot of the ideas I'm going to be talking about are building off of ideas that I brought up in the first video. In my first video, I demonstrated how the staff wasn't necessarily the best way of visually expressing intervals accurately. The reason is because intervals that look the same distance apart on the staff vary in distance as the location of one semitone and two semitone units of space is constantly being shifted, depending on which particular line or space your interval structure is starting on, or which particular key signature is at play, or which clef you're in, or which accidentals are being applied to your interval structure. What this means is that if you were just to quickly glance at a piece of sheet music, unless you have a lot of musical training, it's very hard to understand what it's going to sound like. However, there are two things related to tone where the staff has a near optimal design for, meaning that it would be very hard to come up with a better visual model for expressing these two things than the staff. You might remember from my last video that there's 12 different major scales, and there's really no difference between these 12 different scales other than which particular note you happen to start on. So you could start on a rather high note, like, or you could start on a slightly lower note. Whichever particular pitch you start on doesn't really change the nature of the music, because it doesn't really change the patterns that you're making music with. Now, composers oftentimes will choose one of these 12 scales, and they'll create music with it. And every harmony or bass line or melody that they make, you can trace back to the exact same notes that you could find in the major scale that they chose. That being said, at certain strategic times, they'll choose notes that you couldn't find in that major scale to add more flavor or more diverse emotion to the music. In any one of these particular key signatures, any line or any space that a note would be on would be part of a larger major scale. We know this because key signatures are comprised of sharps and flats, which are added in such a way to shift where the one semitone intervals occur to make sure the pattern that creates a major scale is always present, any key you're playing on, in the staff. This means that whenever we see an accidental marking, such as these flat accidentals next to a note on a line or a space, and it's not part of the original key signature, we know for sure that whatever structure that accidental is being applied to couldn't be part of the major scale. Here's a quiz. Assuming that a composer is doing their job properly and is using the right key signature, which one of these notes can't be traced back to a major scale? If you couldn't figure out the answer in a few seconds, I probably did a pretty bad job explaining myself over the last few minutes, because the answers are really obvious. The notes that couldn't be traced back to a major scale would be basically any note that had an accidental marking by it. This is what I mean when I talk about an optimal model for understanding something in music, as opposed to a functional model for understanding. With optimal models, you can simply glance at them with almost no music training and immediately be able to understand an idea or a concept in music. In this case, the concept being whether a particular note belongs with other notes as part of the same major scale. The other thing that the staff has a great design for is for communicating, especially to pianists and woodwind players, which buttons on their instruments to press. Now, really every musician can use the staff for knowing which pitches they should be producing from their instruments, but its design is especially biased to be useful for pianists and woodwinds. Every note on the staff, whether it's on a line or a space, is a white note on a piano. The exception is if there's a sharp or a flat that's either an accidental or in the key signature. Rather, instead, you'll play a black note by that white note that's either higher than the white note with a sharp or lower than the white note with a flat. So for example, if I was to play this line at the top, I would play it like this. And then at the point where I was to hit this note, and normally I would hit this white note, since there's a sharp by it, I would just note a raise by one semitone and hit this note instead. Woodwinds like this saxophone also have a design that benefits from the staff. For an instrument like the saxophone, the buttons that run down the middle, if these were on the staff, they would also be the white notes on the piano. And the buttons that are off to the side, if these were on the staff, they would, at least most of the time, be what would be the black notes on the piano. For other instruments, of course, the staff isn't quite as ideal. For guitar, the most intuitive way of knowing exactly which buttons you should be pressing is probably tablature. And for a brass instrument like this trumpet, there actually hasn't really been a system that's been designed to take advantage of the idiosyncrasies of the trumpet. As I close out this video, there's a few final points I want to make. And one is that I want to clear up a misconception where some musicians believe that the staff is optimal for understanding music so long as all that music takes place in one key signature. And while we saw today that the staff is really good at telling us whether a note can be seen as part of a key signature or not part of a key signature by whether there's an accidental next to it, that doesn't mean that the staff is as quick and as useful for understanding what's actually happening within that key signature. It doesn't take almost any time to train a new musician to be able to tell immediately whether something fits in or doesn't fit into a key signature. But it still takes a lot of time with the design of the staff to train a new musician to understand exactly what the structures inside of the key signature are. The final point that I want to make is that even though during our lifetime it's unlikely that sheet music isn't based around the staff, there's no reason that we can't put effort into creating new visual models that are more intuitive and more optimized than the staff for understanding intervals, and that these models could be useful for the sake of educating new musicians, or for the sake of helping composers come up with different ideas for writing songs, or for even the sake of being a prototype to base a new type of musical instrument's button layout off of. In my next video, I'm going to talk about a design that I've come up with that I believe is as intuitive and visually useful for understanding intervals as The staff is for understanding whether a note fits in or doesn't fit into a key signature. Thank you.